In the small hours of Friday morning, even before any official results were announced, the signs of an electoral upset were becoming apparent. Exit polls from the UK's second general election in 3 years suggested Prime Minister Theresa May's governing Conservative Party could lose its parliamentary majority. First in Asia, then in London, traders on currency floors like this one were becoming nervous about the outcome. Their knee-jerk reaction: sell sterling. And this was the result. The British pound slumped by more than 2% against the US dollar, its biggest loss in 8 months. It was a similar story for the pound against the euro. Those currency moves prompted a divergence in UK-listed stocks. The FTSE 100 index jumped by more than 0.5%. Companies on that gauge earn most of their profits overseas, and a weak pound is good for them. But it was bad news for the mostly UK-based companies on the broader FTSE 250 index. The fall in sterling will put more pressure on their earnings. Investors are concerned that political uncertainty could lead to an unfavourable outcome for the UK economy in its talks to leave the EU.
I think now what they want to see is certainty. Markets always hate uncertainty. It's a great cliche, but it does ring true. And I think we just want to see some stability in the domestic political scene, especially at this really important moment when we're heading into Brexit negotiations.
And those fears may not be without foundation. In Paris, the EU's Economic and Financial Affairs Commissioner sounded a veiled threat to whoever will be negotiating with him.
Ça ne sera pas sans impact.
It will probably not be without an impact on the character of the negotiations, on the political facts of the negotiation, but it doesn't call into question the fact that negotiations will be opened and we are ready to conduct them on a firm but friendly basis.
The political intrigue is likely to continue in these Houses of Parliament for weeks or even months to come. It could be felt on the balance sheets of companies and the bank accounts of ordinary people for much longer. So let's delve a little deeper into this stunning election result and what it could mean for the British economy and its people. Joining me from London is Steve Keen. He's a professor of economics at Kingston University. Let's start with the politics. Does this result mean that the UK is headed for a Brexit with no favourable access to European markets?
Possibly actually not, because really there's been no plan from the Tories apart from the three-word slogan, Brexit means Brexit, whatever that means. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn through the campaign was saying his main objective was to secure continued access to the Eurozone as a free trade zone. And that may well be that because we now have someone who actually knows how to design policies, and Corbyn has shown that with the manifesto he put out, there may actually be more successful negotiation over the terms than there would have been had it been left in May's hands.
Interesting viewpoint there, Steve. Steve, you had said that the EU could fall apart in 5 years and that the UK could be better off outside of that club. The Eurozone, though, is expected to grow this year. It's actually expected to post its fastest growth rate in 2 years. Meanwhile, the UK is going the other way. It's looking like Europe's laggard. Have we got it all wrong? Do you regret having backed the Brexit vote now?
Not at all. The euro currency was a stupid idea right from the outset. It's causing economic collapse in the south of Europe. The only reason that Europe has turned around to some extent is that European households and corporations are deleveraging more slowly than they were at the absolute depths of the imposition of austerity. That is because they're deleveraging more slowly, that actually stimulates the economy. So that's what's actually caused the turnaround there. It's got far more to do about credit and the impact of the creation of money by the banking sector and what the government policies do on that capability than it has to do with free trade or anything else. So the fact that that Europe is growing slightly now is no excuse for the fact that Europe has been the economic basket case of the planet, courtesy of the euro.
But is it worth the political confusion that has resulted now and the consequences that we're seeing on the financial markets?
The financial markets are always going to get jittery about anything. We know that the the markets have overvalued the pound for the last 10 or 20 years now, because the strength of the pound has really reflected the growth of the financial sector in England, and that really has reflected almost a quadrupling of the level of private debt in this economy over the last 30 years before it became completely financialised. So that money flow into the city has caused English manufacturing to become quite uncompetitive, and the drop in the value of the pound of the order now of between 20 and 30% against the euro, that may, and against the American dollar, that may give a chance for the UK to rebuild its manufacturing sector, which is effectively halved in size compared to GDP in the last 20 years, whereas Germany, which has been a beneficiary of the eurozone, has actually maintained its manufacturing sector at something like 3 times the size of the UK relative to its economy.
Steve Keen at Kingston University in London, thank you so much. Now let's go to Amsterdam and speak to Jasmine Birtles, personal finance expert and British TV and radio personality. Jasmine, thanks so much for joining us on Money Talks. So let's bring this down to earth. How should people on both sides of the channel be positioning themselves after this vote?
Well, I do think that this vote shows that the government doesn't have the whole of the country, or even, frankly, half of the country behind it in terms of Brexit. I think that this hung Parliament, particularly with the support of the DUP, which is very much a Remain party, I think this means that we will, at the very least, have a soft Brexit, possibly no Brexit at all. And I agree. I mean, I am a Remainer. I have to say this. I'm pro staying in Europe. But I agree. I think we should hit the whoops button right now and say, yeah, actually, we made a mistake. Possibly have another referendum even.
Some would turn around and say, well, we had a democratic process and the people of the UK spoke.
They did, but I think they spoke with quite a lot of ignorance, and they spoke about things that actually weren't even to do with Brexit at the time. You know, when people were asked, why did you vote to come out of Europe, much of the time it was as a protest vote against our current UK government and all sorts of things like that. Also, since that vote, sterling has plummeted, petrol has become more expensive, food has become more expensive. And even the farmers, and this is, to me, a very strange one, but the farmers in Britain mostly voted for Brexit. They voted to come out of the EU, even with the EU subsidies. But now, just in the last few weeks, apparently even the farmers are showing that they are worried, they are concerned about their future, they're beginning to wonder whether it was a good idea. So I do feel that there's been a sea change in people's general feeling about Brexit and about whether we should actually stay in Europe.
Jasmine Birtles in Amsterdam, thank you so much for joining us on Money Talks. So let's get the view from continental Europe now, and our editor at large, Craig Copetas, joins us from Paris. Let's start with what you're hearing from where you are in terms of the legislative elections that are coming up next week. How have the UK elections that we've just had, how are they playing into the elections that are coming up where you are?
Well, so far there's no trash talk, but there's a lot of snickering and consternation. And what we're hearing from France and across the continent is the belief that virtually every politician in the UK was pretending to be for something that they're not really for, which is Brexit. And there's a kind of astonishment that virtually all of the politicians who are running, regardless of their party, ran on a platform that was explicitly committed to leaving the EU. And what people here are asking is, hey, England, you know, you're in political chaos. Why can't you just fess up and say and trigger the oops clause in Article 50, which is, hey, we made a mistake, sorry, we're coming back in. Yeah. I mean, that's the feeling here. Yeah. I mean, Donald Tusk this afternoon, I mean, was making, for the president of the European Union, was making fun of Theresa May in a tweet. He said, quote, "Congratulations, Theresa May. Our responsibility is to secure the least disruptive Brexit. No time to lose." It's a lot of chuckling over here.
Yeah, I can imagine that, Craig. Look, so the UK newspapers are having a field day of it. Of course, the Sun calling it mayhem. We've talked about this before. Banks and financial institutions in the UK that are looking to possibly relocate some of their European back office operations, places like Paris, Frankfurt, happy to have them if they can. Does this election change that equation? Does it make it a little bit more likely that they may move to where you are?
I think it does, and in fact, the Macron administration here is going full tilt boogie with ads throughout the world trying to lure people to France. He's going to change the laws here, the legislation on employment, and he wants people to come here from the tech industry, the banking industry, the finance industry. He's really going for it. Now, whether it's going to be successful or not, I mean, one of the kind of things you're hearing here is that, believe it or not, you know, Vladimir Putin, where was his involvement in this election in England, and was he actually working on France's behalf? And the conclusion was, when I was over at the National Assembly earlier today, says Putin was clearly involved in influencing the UK elections simply because he has seemed to weaponize indifference, and that is what the takeaway here is, that France is taking a leadership role over the UK by employing Anglo-American fundamentals and elementals to one of the most moribund economies in Europe in hopes of changing the game. And the people here in France and the voters actually believe it. It's going to happen. And we'll find out more as the legislative elections proceed. There's 2 rounds, the first one this Sunday. And right now, Macron's En Marche party is looking to get a supermajority.
Craig Copetas in Paris, thank you so much.